Alright, our first speaker today is Stephanie Gray. Stephanie Gray is an international presenter who began speaking at the age of 18. She has given over 700 pro-life presentations across North America, as well as in the United Kingdom, Ireland, Latvia, and Costa Rica. Stephanie has debated abortion advocates such as physicians who do abortion. Her audience are vast, including medical students, churches of various denominations, seminaries, high schools, and pro-life organizations. She has spent 12 years as executive director and co-founder of the Canadian Centre for Bioethical Reform, and in 2014 she returned to her home province of British Columbia and now speaks on behalf of her ministry, Love Unleashes Life. Stephanie is faculty at Blackstone Legal Fellowship, where she trains law students from around the world about conversing persuasively on abortion. She is author of A Physician's Guide to Discussing Abortion, and she regularly trains medical students in pro-life apologetics. In January 2016, she will be releasing a new book called Love Unleashes Life, Abortion and the Art of Communicating Truth. A round of applause for Stephanie Gray.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. Several years ago, I was in Florida on a campus giving presentations about abortion. And I met a student who made a profound impact on me. Her name was Nadej, and she shared with me her story. When she was 16 years old, she got pregnant. And her boyfriend was not supportive. Her own father, upon learning of her pregnancy, disowned her. Her 5 brothers stopped speaking with her, and her mother had been dead since she was 2 years old. Nadej's story is one in which perhaps many would say is the reason why we need an abortion. It's circumstances like the one she found herself in, with a lack of support, being very young, that would really make the case for abortion. And what we're asked to consider today is whether abortion is Nadej's right, if it's a woman's right, or, the position I'm going to be representing, is that it's a moral wrong. So is abortion a woman's right or a moral wrong? And this is a great controversy, as I titled my first slide, because there's great disagreement on that question, the conclusion that various sides come to. Before I represent the pro-life position, in which there is disagreement on, I want to begin by actually talking about something that doesn't seem abortion related, but where both sides of the abortion debate have agreement. And I want to start where we have agreement, because I believe in identifying where we have agreement. What we can do is identify the foundational principles that I'm going to be proposing for the case that I'll be making against abortion. In terms of where we have agreement, both sides of the abortion debate, but not related to the topic of abortion, there have been a number of atrocities that have happened around our world over the years, over the centuries, the existence of human beings on this earth. And there are 3 in particular that occurred this year that outraged the world. One that I want to draw your attention to occurred in March of this year. The co-pilot of a German... Thank you. Great. The co-pilot of a Germanwings airline that was flying from Spain to Germany decided to turn his act of suicide into over 100 acts of homicide and crashed his plane in the French Alps. And our world looked at that action and was horrified at all the innocent lives lost. Then, in October of this year, there were the students at Umpqua Community College in Oregon who faced the terror of a shooter opening up gunfire on their campus, and again, innocent lives being lost. Then there was just over 1 week ago in Paris, the terrorist attack that again ended innocent lives. Both those who support abortion and those who oppose abortion have common ground on these 3 atrocities. And the common ground that we have is that we resoundingly condemn all 3 of these atrocities. and we say that they were wrong. Now let's consider for a moment why each one of these atrocities were wrong. Well, to figure out why they're wrong, I want to start with why they're not wrong. Notice that we consider all three of these incidents to be atrocities, to be injustices, and yet all three of these incidents occurred in different environments, in different places. But environment is irrelevant when determining the morality of those actions. Now let's imagine for a moment, not even imagine, consider for a moment the victims of these three atrocities. They were all different ages. Some victims were in their 60s, some victims were in their 20s and in between and below. And what we can deduce from that is that age is irrelevant when determining the morality of these actions. Then let's consider for a moment the kinds of people that were killed. They had varying, you could say, intellectual abilities. Yet we know that intelligence is irrelevant when determining the morality and the immorality of these actions. And the people who were killed may have had varying degrees of a will to live. Imagine one of the victims of any number of these atrocities was planning on committing suicide the day after they were intentionally killed by a stranger. Would the action of the stranger killing the person still be wrong? Absolutely. So we see a will to live is irrelevant when determining whether these actions were right or wrong. What is relevant when determining the morality of these actions? What causes us to conclude that these actions were immoral is that humans have human rights. It's that simple. We look at the victims in all these cases knowing regardless of their environment, regardless of their age, regardless of their intellectual abilities, and regardless of whether they had a will to live or not. Both sides of the abortion debate can agree that humans have human rights, and that's what made each one of those atrocities wrong. If you look at the Declaration of Independence, it very clearly says that all men are created equal with the inalienable right to life. Then if you look at the United Nations in its Universal Declaration of Human Rights, it very explicitly states that all members of the human family have the right to life. So at the most basic level, humans have human rights. And so the necessary criteria for getting the human right is being simply human. If, for example, we're talking about women's rights, those who get them are women. If we're talking about children's rights, those who get them are children. And so therefore, if we're talking about human rights, those who get them are human. Seeing that common ground that both sides of the debate have, now let's go to where we don't have common ground, in terms of determining whether the act of abortion is a woman's right or is a moral wrong. What I'm going to be doing to be able to make a sound case is focusing on the fact that the preborn child is a human being like you or me, or like the victims of the three atrocities that I just highlighted. And it follows that if the preborn child is a human being, and if we believe humans have human rights, then it would follow that abortion is a moral wrong. So what I'm going to be doing is breaking my presentation into three parts. The first thing is going to be answering that question, are preborn children human beings? And if so, at what point of pregnancy does that life begin? The second thing I'm going to do is answer the question, what is abortion? What does it do to preborn children? And the third thing I'm going to do is reflect on the situation that a pregnant woman may find herself in, and the very real sufferings that exist for some women faced with an unexpected pregnancy. In terms of the first thing I want to focus on, the question of when life begins. If you look at embryology textbooks used by medical students, they very clearly and consistently state that human development begins at fertilization. Moore and Persad, for example, have authored many embryology textbooks, there's also Langman's embryology, and these, amongst many other embryology texts, very clearly state human development is a continuum that begins at fertilization, that begins when the egg is fertilized by the sperm. But rather than just hang on to the idea that embryology textbooks tell us that, I think it's important for us to explore the basic science. So not just look at the conclusion of what the textbooks say, but the reasoning behind it, why that conclusion is what people settle on, what the embryologists settle on. If you look at embryology and human reproduction, when scientists want to distinguish one cell type from another cell type, they look at two criteria. They look at cell composition and cell behavior in order to see whether two cells are the same kind of thing, if they have the same composition and the same behavior, or are a different kind of thing, if they have a different composition or a different behavior. What I'm going to be elaborating on at this point is something that you can read more about online in a paper by a professor of neurobiology called When Does Human Life Begin? By Dr. Maureen Condick. When Does Human Life Begin? And she makes a profound scientific case for life beginning at fertilization, which some of you or all of you may realize is a process. Now, I'm Canadian, so I think Americans say process, but I say process. So it's a process that takes about 24 hours. And Dr. Condick makes a very scientific case for how life begins at the beginning of that process, at the beginning of that 24-hour period. And the way she does that is to look at those two criteria, cell composition and cell behavior. So take the sperm cell, for example. The composition of that cell is the genetic material of the father. The behavior of that cell is to find an egg and fertilize it. Well, let's compare and contrast that with an egg cell. We know that the sperm cell and the egg cell are different because of those two criteria. The composition of an egg cell is different from that of the sperm cell. It's composed of the genetic material of the mother. Then look at behavior. The behavior of an egg cell is radically different from the behavior of the sperm cell, and the egg cell basically sits there and allows for fertilization to happen. Bearing that in mind, now let's look at the one-cell embryo, or zygote. And based on the criteria of cell composition and cell behavior, we can see that at the moment of fertilization, also referred to as sperm-egg fusion, we're dealing with something substantively different than what we had before. The composition of the embryo is the genetic material of the mother and the father. Even before the chromosomes have intermingled, nonetheless, all of that is contained within the embryo, making it different from the sperm and the egg according to composition. Then consider behavior. If another sperm comes along and attempts to penetrate the embryo will not allow the sperm to enter it. So it is behaving differently from the egg, which would allow the sperm to penetrate it, or the sperm, which is to try to penetrate something. So we see that the one-celled embryo, by its behavior preventing any sperm from entering it, is behaving differently, it's composed differently. So we know we have something substantively different the moment of sperm-egg fusion, the beginning of the process of fertilization, than we had before fertilization, when we have the sperm and the egg by themselves. We know in the case of human reproduction that one-celled embryo must be human because beings reproduce after their own kind. So as long as the parents are human, the one-celled embryo is going to be human. And unlike the sperm and the egg, which are mere parts, when they come together, we now have a whole human who simply is going to change in appearance and ability, but not the very nature. That is going to remain the same. So the genetic identity you have today, which distinguishes you from your classmates and your parents, that was determined not sometime after fertilization, not before fertilization, but at the moment of fertilization. And from that point forward, you changed your appearance and your abilities, but your nature has remained the same. In the same way, since all of us were newborns, we've changed our appearance and we've changed our abilities, but our identity has remained the same. In order to wrap our minds around this idea that something so small and seemingly insignificant could be a whole human, what I want to do is make an analogy to this. Hopefully you can see it here. I'm holding up a small photo, and it's a very old technology, although it's making a comeback, so I think we're all probably familiar with it, but this is a Polaroid picture. Now, imagining the old Polaroid technology, what would happen is you'd have a plain white card, you'd insert it in a camera, you would snap a photo, and when the card would come out, who knows what you would see initially? What do you see initially on a Polaroid picture? Black smudges, and what do? Shake it like a Polaroid picture, right? You shake it, okay, and then once you've shaken it in a few minutes, you see the fully developed image that you have just taken a photo of. Now I bring this up because I'd like us to do a little thought experiment. I would like us to imagine that you're going on vacation, and let's say just prior to going on vacation, you stop by your parents' house and you discover they have an old Polaroid camera in their closet. And you think, wow, this would be really fun to take on vacation with me because I don't print out my photos anymore, but if I have a Polaroid camera, all the printouts, I can make an album, I can document my vacation right away. And so let's say you ask your parents if you can take the Polaroid on your trip with you, they say sure. And let's say you're going to where my dad is from. Dr. Potts and I were speaking about this earlier. My dad is from Scotland. Okay, that's right. So let's imagine you go to Scotland, and while you're in Scotland, you go to a very famous place in Scotland. Okay, right, it's called Loch Ness. Now what's in Loch Ness? The monster. Well, you know, my grandma, she was so blind she couldn't see her hand in front of her face, but she swore out in the distance she saw Nessie. So, in this little thought experiment, let's imagine you go on vacation to Scotland, and you take your parents' Polaroid camera, and you go on a boat tour of Loch, meaning lake, Loch Ness. And a couple hours into this boat tour, you're taking photos with your Polaroid. You look over your shoulder at one point, and you see Nessie. All the humps and bumps are sticking out of the water, so you point your Polaroid in that direction. You snap a photo, and the card comes out. And just as the card comes out, Nessie goes underwater. Now, are you going to be disappointed that she's disappeared? No, why? Because you're holding the picture in your hand, and you're thinking, you know, everyone thought this thing was a myth, but this picture is going to prove that Nessie actually exists. And I have a lot of student debt, you might be thinking to yourself. But if I sell this picture to magazines and newspapers, they're going to give me a whole lot of money. So this is valuable. And so you're looking at this picture, which initially just looks like black smudges. And you start shaking it. And you're really excited. And let's imagine, in this thought experiment, there's a tourist on the boat tour with you who's never seen a Polaroid camera before, has no idea how the technology works. They excitedly grab the card from you to have a look at Nessie, but in their mind they don't see Nessie. In their mind, all they see are black smudges, and they think the photo didn't take properly. And so with great disappointment, they rip it and toss it in the lake. Would you be upset? Okay, right, so I think we need to know about us Scottish people, right, is we have a wee bit of a temper. Okay, that's why there's a movie called Braveheart. Right, so my Scottish temper would come out, and I would get angry at the person for destroying the photo. Now imagine they looked at me, or you, if it's you in this scenario, and they said, but it's just black smudges. What do you care about black smudges for? And you'd likely reply, it wasn't just black smudges. Everything about the image of the Loch Ness Monster was captured in an instant. It just needed time to develop. The same can be said about who each one of us is here today, and the one-celled embryo we can see in the third picture there, captured in the instant of sperm-egg fusion. We just needed time to develop. Now consider, before the photo is taken, when you have a blank white card, that's not a picture. It's a potential picture. That's like the sperm and the egg. That's not a human. That's a potential human. But the moment that white card goes in the camera and you snap a photo, you do have a picture with great potential. An important difference. Before you snap the photo, it's a potential picture. The moment you snap a photo, it is now a picture with great potential. The sperm and the egg are potential humans, but they're not humans yet. Once they come together in sperm-egg fusion, we now have a human with great potential. The way the infant pictured here is not a potential human, but is a human with great potential. So we have a 5-year-old or a 10-year-old is a human, but with great potential to do the things that you and I can do, or someone older than us. So from fertilization onwards, there is maturation, there is development, but your identity remains the same. What I'd like to do is just ask you to consider a few questions to show that deep down, intuitively, we know this makes sense, that life begins at fertilization. Consider for a moment where the vast majority of Americans would say they support abortion up to. Public opinion polls have shown that a majority of Americans support abortion up to the 3rd month of pregnancy. But that reference to the 3rd month of pregnancy is actually making a concession. Anytime we talk about 12 weeks or 3 months, we are admitting, we're conceding life begins at fertilization. Because to get to 12 weeks implies something happened 12 weeks ago that we considered so significant that it's like we press start on the timer, watching time pass by. So for someone to say, no one knows when life begins, as some people might say, but if you were to ask someone, well, when would you ban abortion, they say 12 weeks, that very label 12 weeks implies life began 12 weeks ago, that we started watching the passage of time. Or consider this question. Would you say that there is a difference between a condom and an abortion? Who would say there's a difference between a condom and an abortion? Raise your hand. So a good number, if not all of us. And you were to ask someone, what would the difference be? And people would typically say, well, a condom prevents pregnancy. Well, then how is abortion different? Well, it ends pregnancy. So there's something there. There's someone there. We recognize by that difference that abortion is ending that which has already begun to exist. Or consider if someone were to claim no one knows when life begins. Isn't it interesting we only seem to say that about our species? Let's imagine we're not talking about human reproduction. Let's imagine we're talking about the reproduction of dogs. Have you ever heard a veterinarian say, no one knows when a dog becomes a dog? No, there's a great consensus amongst veterinarians. When we talk about other species, they will all admit that a dog becomes a dog at sperm-egg fusion of the female dog's egg and the male dog's sperm. Or cats, or another animal. We all acknowledge that life begins at fertilization. So why do we claim to not know when it comes to our own species? Or consider we're not talking about ending a pregnancy. Let's consider we're talking about making a pregnancy. That someone's problem is not fertility that they don't like and they want to have an abortion, but it's infertility that they don't like and they want to have a baby. Have you ever heard someone who works in the field of in vitro fertilization say, I just don't know when life begins? Isn't it interesting that when we want to make life, we all know when life begins? What is the one moment the IVF specialist is trying to replicate in a lab? Is it the heartbeat? Is it brainwaves? Is the IVF specialist happy with just a sperm sample? Is an IVF specialist happy with just a bunch of donor eggs? No. The one moment that the IVF specialist is trying to replicate in the lab is the moment of sperm-egg fusion. You see, when we want to make life, we say we know when it begins. But when we want to end life, we claim to not know. One other point I'd like to make with regards to questions we can ask to show the intuition we all have that life begins before birth is to consider for a moment the Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, that is a UN document that has been signed by the United States. In this Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, it outlines a number of things, including standards on the death penalty. Now, setting aside the great debate that is the death penalty, one thing that both those who oppose the death penalty and those who support the death penalty agree on is that no innocent person should ever get the death penalty. So there's debate about how the guilty should be treated, but there is consensus on both sides of the debate that no innocent person should ever get the death penalty. Now consider that in light of the Covenant on Civil and Political Rights. In its reference to the death penalty, it says, no pregnant woman may be given the death penalty. So here's the question. What's the difference between a guilty woman who's not pregnant and is in a country that says she deserves the death penalty and will get it, versus a guilty woman who is pregnant and yet is in a country that would say she normally should get the death penalty, but they won't give it to her while she's pregnant? What's the difference between both guilty women? The difference is in the body of one, not both, one of the two pregnant women is an innocent person. And there is this acknowledgement that we don't give the death penalty to innocent people. So if being pregnant is what spares a guilty woman in some countries from getting the death penalty, that's an admission that within her body is the presence of an innocent person. Which then brings me to an important point that I need to address. And that is, I just used the term person. And some people might say, even if the embryo is biologically human, the embryo is not a person. And so what we need to ask ourselves is, what is a person? And many people, no pun intended, will say, well, a person is someone with a higher level of brain function, someone who's rational, conscious, or self-aware. And if that's the definition an individual has of a person, then we want to ask ourselves a question. Why isn't the embryo at fertilization rational, conscious, or self-aware? And someone may say, well, because to have those functions, you need a brain. And at fertilization, the embryo doesn't have a brain. Okay, why doesn't the embryo have a brain? Well, the embryo at fertilization doesn't have a brain because it hasn't had the time to develop the brain. Okay, and time is reflected in our age. Yes, the one-celled embryo currently isn't rational, conscious, or self-aware, but the reason she isn't rational, conscious, or self-aware is because of how old she is. Why should those of us who are older have a right to kill those who are younger? If we say the preborn child, who we know is biologically human, if we say she's not a person because she's not rational, conscious, or self-aware, we're depriving her of her legal protections because of her age. That would make us guilty of age discrimination. And notice that what's necessary for human rights is being a human. They're not called age-based rights. They're called human rights. If you're a member of the human family, you should get the right. Now, someone may say, wait a minute, if you're going to give personhood rights to a one-celled embryo, are you going to give personhood rights to an amoeba? That's one cell. Well, let's consider for a moment, if we consider higher level functioning to be something that we do find impressive, let's ask ourselves, well, why can't an amoeba be conscious, rational, or self-aware? Well, the amoeba can't do those things because the amoeba doesn't have a brain. Well, why doesn't an amoeba have a brain? Well, the amoeba doesn't have a brain because it's not within its nature to be a thinking thing. So the amoeba isn't rational, conscious, or self-aware because of what it is. Whereas the human embryo at fertilization is not rational, conscious, or self-aware because of how old it is. And it would be wrong to discriminate against a fellow human because of their age. Going back to human rights doctrines, in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights by the United Nations, in Article 6, it very clearly states everyone has a right to recognition everywhere as a person before the law. Who's everyone? They define it in the preamble as all members of the human family. So all you need to be is a member of the human family, and you automatically get that legal protection of personhood. So since we know the embryo of human parents is a member of the human family, beginning her life at sperm-egg fusion, it would follow that since she only differs from us according to age, that she must be considered a person because she's a member of the human family. The last two things I want to briefly address before wrapping up my presentation is the question of what does abortion do and what about the woman? We can't overlook the very real suffering that women in crisis may face. In terms of what does abortion do, knowing that each of us began our lives at the moment of sperm egg fusion, we then need to be intellectually honest and say, okay, then if the act of abortion is going to happen after fertilization, obviously it does, people who get a negative pregnancy test don't go to an abortion clinic. So if the act of abortion happens after fertilization, an intellectually honest discussion has to look at the facts of what abortion is and what abortion does. And so I'm going to play a very brief video to bring forward that evidence. Several years ago, I debated an abortionist by the name of Dr. Fellows, and in showing imagery like that, I said to him, Dr. Fellows, is that an accurate representation of what you see and what you do? His response in front of 150 medical students was, absolutely. If we believe that abortion is a woman's right, we need to look at the evidence of what abortion does. But once we see that evidence, it's very hard to maintain the idea that a woman would have the right to dismember or hire someone to dismember the body of her offspring. It's very difficult to talk about abortion in the language that I have in a culture in which abortion is so prevalent. Because the challenge that we're faced with as we try to discern whether abortion is a woman's right or a moral wrong is that it's happened so frequently, over 50 million times here in America since its legalization. That means we ourselves might have had abortions. That means our mothers, our sisters, our girlfriends, our cousins might have had abortions. And so it becomes difficult to talk about abortion as being wrong if those we love have done it. Because we may think, if I condemn abortion, am I condemning my loved one? And I'd like you to consider for a moment that it's entirely possible to love someone and respect someone, but still oppose something that they might do. If any of us had a loved one who drove drunk and killed someone, I hope we would still love the person, but condemn their action, and be able to distinguish who they are from a choice that they've made. We can reject a certain behavior, but that doesn't mean we have to reject the person as a whole. So what I'm proposing with my position is not that we reject ourselves or our loved ones who have made this choice, but we be able to say, I can love you and still disagree with certain choices that you've made based on the evidence of what abortion does. The final point that I want to address is the crisis that a pregnant woman may find herself in, because I don't want to overlook the very real suffering that exists for women like Nadej, who found herself pregnant at 16. And one very real tragedy that we need to address in our culture is pregnancy from rape. I have several friends who were molested as children, and what I've come to see in journeying with one of them in particular is that whether someone gets pregnant from sexual assault or not, a very real trauma has gone on. And we have to help people in crisis. But we have to ask ourselves, is abortion going to unrape a rape victim? Is abortion going to take the traumatic memories away? In journeying with my friends who have gone through this unspeakable atrocity, it's become clear to me that abortion is not going to take the memories away. and that we fool ourselves if we lead someone to believe that. Having an abortion is not going to take away all the reminders that will come in the subsequent weeks and months and years. So if we truly care for people who have been victimized, we want to alleviate the suffering without eliminating the people around them, whether that person is a preborn child or a born child. And so that brings me to a point I'd like to make. In this New York Times article several years ago, this woman, an abortionist, Dr. Wicklund, was interviewed. And in this interview, she talked about doing an abortion on a victim of rape. But what Dr. Wicklund says in this interview is she describes with horror doing an abortion on a woman who'd been raped, as afterwards she was examining the removed tissue and realized the pregnancy was further along than she or the woman had thought, and that she had just aborted an embryo the woman and her husband had conceived together. The abortionist was horrified. But let me ask you to consider this. What's the difference between a child conceived in love, as she realized this child had been with the woman's husband, and a child conceived in violence, had the child been the product of the rapist? The difference is who the father is. But what's the same? That we're dealing with a human being. If it was wrong to kill the embryo because she was conceived in love, it's actually wrong because she's human, not because she was conceived in love. Our value is grounded in being human, not being grounded in the circumstances under which we were conceived. So we need to help people who are suffering, but not by inflicting harm on more life. Some people will say, what if a woman is poor? Shouldn't we alleviate poverty without eliminating the poor? Shouldn't we help women in crisis rather than kill their children? But some people might say, well, no, we need to have abortion legal. It's helping women, because if it's illegal, women will do it anyways and they'll die. Well, let me propose to you that I don't want abortion legal or illegal because I don't want it at all. Based on the evidence that I presented today, we see the child as a human, that abortion dismembers the body of the human. So what I like to propose is that abortion become unthinkable. And that if we truly care about women, we're going to identify what's behind her motivation to have an illegal abortion. When I was doing research for this debate, I read about Dr. Potts' experience in seeing abortion before it was legal, and seeing women traumatized by choices that they made in which they were hemorrhaging, some being severely harmed by illegal abortion, some women dying from it. And his desire to help them shows me there's a noble and good intention there. I too believe we need to help women in that situation. What we disagree on is what the solution is to help them. And what I'd like to propose is that although we can agree it's a crisis that a woman be harmed in an illegal abortion, the solution is not to give her a legal one, but to address the underlying motivation for her to end the pregnancy to begin with. Jerry Santoro is a perfect example of that. She died from having an illegal abortion that she and her boyfriend attempted to do. And the image of her being found naked in a pool of her own blood in the 1960s was published in Ms. magazine and became the image for the abortion rights movement to say, this is why we need abortion. But when we look past the image and we get to the details, what we realize is that Jerry didn't need an abortion, she needed support. First of all, Jerry had a self-inflicted abortion at 6 months. Even most abortion supporters are not comfortable with abortion at 6 months. But secondly, if we truly care about Jerry, we're going to ask, why did she abort? Well, Jerry aborted because she was pregnant by her boyfriend, but had an estranged husband. Her estranged husband was a very bad and abusive man. And she feared that if her estranged husband knew she was pregnant by another man, that he would kill her, and her 2 born children would be left orphans. Jerry didn't have an illegal abortion because she wanted to kill a baby. She was actually in a relationship with a man she loved. Jerry had an abortion because she feared the man who didn't love her, who she didn't love, was going to kill her. No woman should have to kill her child to prevent a very bad man from attempting to kill her. So if we truly care about women, we're going to support them and keep the bad people away from harming them, not forcing them into a situation where they end up inflicting harm instead. To wrap up my presentation, I would like to go back to what I said at the beginning. If we look at the 3 of many atrocities which occurred this year, we realize that they were wrong because humans have human rights and they were deprived of that basic right to life. The environment of the victims is irrelevant. The age of the victims is irrelevant. The intelligence of the victims is irrelevant. And the will to live that the victims may or may not have had is irrelevant. What is relevant is, are the victims human? And if we believe in human rights and that all humans are equal, that's what makes those atrocities wrong. And so the same is true when it comes to the preborn, who biologically we know to be a human. And according to the UN's Universal Declaration of Human Rights, we know to be a person by being a member of the human family. Their environment, being in their mom's body, not like us, it's irrelevant. Their age is irrelevant. Whether they have intellectual abilities like us or not at that moment is irrelevant. And whether they have a will to live or not is irrelevant. What matters is, are they humans? If they're humans, humans have human rights, and humans need our support. Nadej didn't have support from her boyfriend. She didn't have support from her father. She didn't have support from her 5 brothers. But to quote her directly, she said, "I seeked help." And she found a couple who welcomed her into their pregnancy home and then eventually into their own home. And they helped Nadej through her pregnancy. And now she's several years beyond that crisis at 16, happily parenting a little boy and pursuing her post-secondary education. So when we take pro-choice and we take pro-life, and we ask whether abortion is a woman's right or a moral wrong, what I'd like to suggest is we take something from each. Let's choose life. Thank you very much.
Just give us 1 minute while we switch presentations.
Our next speaker will be Professor Malcolm Potts. Professor Potts is a Cambridge trained obstetrician and reproductive scientist. He is a professor at the Berkeley School of Public Health and founder and director emeritus of the Bixby Center of Population Health and Sustainability at UC Berkeley. In the 1960s, he was the medical spokesperson for the reform of the English abortion law as the first medical director of the International Planned Parenthood Federation. In the 1970s, he introduced family planning methods into scores of developing countries. As CEO of Family Health International in the 1980s, he oversaw numerous clinical studies of contraception, pioneered the first large-scale studies of maternal mortality in developing countries, and launched the first USA-funded initiative to slow the spread of HIV in Africa. Potts was also on the founding board of Marie Stopes International, PDA, PSI, and FHI, and IPAS. His current focus is the OASIS initiative, which seeks solutions to the perfect storm of population, climate, and gender problems arising with the health. Let's please have a warm round of applause.
Thank you very much. Welcome to a very special afternoon. I've been involved in these debates on a number of occasions, but Stephanie was the first person who is our guest today who approached me by email and said, should we meet before our meeting? I thought what a wonderful idea that was, that we could sit and talk with each other, get to know each other, because I think we respect each other and we do have common goals. And I think the one common goal that we have is that abortion is important. And it's something everybody ought to think about. And that you are the audience that has to look at what we're doing and think deeply and with respect to what either of us is saying. And that we'll look forward to your questions. It's begin formally, I want to go back something, as you know, I'm the professor recorded this. When I push this. I mentioned this at the very beginning. When I was talking to Stephanie, I said, you know, the word love, I really do love this class. It's a very inspiring class, so it's partly student-run. And I had this ambition of trying to create another class, which is the one I'm advertising here, which has now gone onto the record, so you could begin to sign up for it. And the idea is to create a class that the students control. And you look at the big problems that will unfold in your professional lives, and the rest of your biological lives, and such as climate change and population growth, can we feed the world's population, technology change and violence, those things. If you like this class, then help us create another class alongside that. So I want to ask these questions, and I want to look at the epidemiological and embryological facts. And then ask what we do, because I think it's a very important question. How does a society handle a situation where sincere people come to rather different conclusions about a rather tough topic? So what are the epidemiological facts? Here you are at Berkeley, and there are this number of students. In Africa, every year, there are 6 million unsafe abortions, and about 26,000 women die from unsafe abortions. So every year in that continent, as many women die as there are men and women on this campus. And I know that I could prevent 95% of those deaths by using the technologies which I'm familiar with for offering women permission in early abortion. So, abortion is unsafe because you can die of hemorrhage, you can die of infection, some abortifacients are poisonous, you can have lifelong infertility. The little name is Solomon Rero. Solomon Rero is a long-time friend of mine from Kenya. He's currently working in the South Sudan, which is a conflict-ridden place. And when we had dinner together a few weeks ago, he told me the story of a woman in South Sudan who'd had an unsafe abortion. And the unsafe abortionist had pushed a stick, not into the vagina, but through the rectum, and through the rectum and on into the uterus. And this woman had come to Solomon, and he'd had to do a hysterectomy because of the infection. And he had to do a colostomy. He had to take the intestines and bring them out through the abdomen because her rectum was so destroyed. She would have to spend the rest of her life passing feces into a plastic bag out of the colostomy, assuming that she can do that in a place that doesn't have any clean water and probably doesn't have any plastic bags. And when Solomon asked this woman, tried to ask her a bit about why she had this abortion, she got very angry. She said, "You are a man. Don't ask me that question." There are about 100 women in this room, few of which may have already had a safe abortion, and who during your lifetimes are likely to have an abortion, because 1 in 3 American women has an abortion. So this is a common event. I am a physician and I've done abortions. And I helped introduce manual vacuum aspiration, which is one of the most commonly used methods. And my wife is with me tonight, and I have also worked very hard with the drug called misoprostol, which you can do at a safe abortion. The difference between unsafe and safe abortions is the biggest gap in epidemiology. It's almost 1,000 times more dangerous to have an unsafe abortion as a safe abortion. Safe abortions, when done in the first 12 weeks of pregnancy, have a death rate of about 1 in 100,000. abortion is common. And it's common both in developed and in developing countries. And I want to take you through some hard data from this country. Before Roe v. Wade, which was a Supreme Court ruling that made safe abortion available throughout the United States, a number of states changed their laws. One of the first ones was New York State. And before the law was changed, we know how many births there were, and there were a few legal abortions, extreme cases which got down in hospital. After the law was changed, there was a small reduction in the number of births and a big jump in the number of abortions. So the first thing we can say, without any shadow of doubt, is that most of these now safe abortions had previously been done unsafely. So because the increase in the number of abortions is much greater than the decrease in the number of births. But then what is really interesting is the next year where we've got very good statistics. And these are statistics on women living in New York State who had abortions. And in this time, there's another small reduction in the total number of births, a very small increase in the total number of safe abortions. And that increase is not sufficient to account for that decrease in the births. So that tells us two things. One is that unsafe abortions are very, very common, and that making abortions safe can actually also be a world where fewer abortions are taking place. Because, like Stephanie, I would like to live in a world where there are fewer abortions. And I do that a lot because I'm very interested in offering women family planning choices. I got my condom tie on today. You can see it in your face one. This is data, and it's slightly complicated. I'll take a few moments to take you through it. This is data from Romania. Today I got an email about North Korea. North Korea has had a safe abortion, and the dictators in North Korea have just made abortion illegal. And I think the same tragedy will unfold in North Korea that we see in Romania. It happens to be that dictators like Nicolae Ceausescu, who was the despot in communist Romania, Idi Amin, who was not a nice person in Uganda, even Hitler outlawed abortion, but at least for non-Jews. You had to have your menstrual cycle checked to prove you weren't having abortions. But abortion was legal and safe until 1966 in Romania. Then one day it was made illegal, and contraception made illegal. The grey area is the total fertility rate, the average number of children that women have over their fertile lifetime. They were having about 2 children, and 6 months later, because some of them were already pregnant, the birth rate doubled because abortion was illegal. But then the total fertility rate comes down. But what happens is that death from abortions goes through the sky. In my experience, working all over the world in this field, when a woman wants an abortion, nothing, not even the threat of death, is going to stop her following that, implementing that design. When the Berlin Wall fell, then the Romanians actually killed Ceausescu about 48 hours later. And the next thing they did, because they'd seen so much suffering, was to reform their abortion law. And so this orange line is the number of legal abortions. And the assumption here, which I think is very well-founded, is there were this number of unsafe abortions previously. But the good thing here, and this is something that Stephanie and I can agree on, is that the number of abortions begins to decline very, very rapidly. Now, why is that? It's because we're able to make the green bars, contraception, more and more available. This is the prevalence rate of contraception. So as Romanian women had access to contraception, the abortion rate plummeted. But because these were safe abortions, the death rate from abortions also disappeared. So this is very powerful data that we don't know how to stop women dying of unsafe abortions, but we do know how to make abortion less common, and there's a very close relationship. The higher the contraceptive prevalence rate, this is 8% use, which you might get in a few developed countries. This is a few percent use you might get in parts of Africa. The abortion rate comes down. So let me look at the embryological factor. And when Stephanie was talking, I was thinking of a situation 50 years ago, because I'm a physician. As Stephanie said, I practiced when abortion was illegal in England. And then, as far as I know, I'm the only abortion provider who also has a PhD in embryology. So I know what I am destroying. And I was recalling when Stephanie was talking that I was the first person in human history ever to look at a mammalian egg attaching to the uterus about 100 hours after fertilization. And that had been seen many times with light microscopes, but I had an electron microscope, it's a very big sort of pillar like this. And the electrons come through, and I was magnifying the attachment of the egg to the uterus 100,000 times. And there's little windows, if you look at the screen where the electrons are showing you the image, with another small microscope. And I was leaning to look at this microscope, and for the first time in my life, and for the first time in human history, I was the first human being who'd seen this process taking place, and this enormous magnification. And it was so awesome that my eyes filled with tears, and I couldn't stick to my microscope. Because I said, wow, that was me at once, that was you at one time. Early embryology is absolutely fascinating and awesome, but it's also very, very complex. First of all, it is not a nice sperm meeting a nice egg, becoming a nice human being and living happily ever afterwards. It's a horribly badly made sperm making some miserable eggs and often going wrong. So this is very early data from many years ago when people just had microscopic studies. John Marcus, very dedicated Roman Catholic gynecologist, who actually was one of the 3 inventors of oral contraceptives. And what he found was, in the weeks before, the days before the woman knows that she's pregnant, before she's even missed her period, there's a very large number of abnormal eggs. We know a lot more about that these days because we have much better ways of studying embryonic loss. And that in 152 conceptions identified at 10 days, again before the woman accepts through chemical means that she's pregnant, only 87 continue to 20 weeks. This is a huge wastage rate. 43% of embryos are aborted. So this is a complex process with a great deal of waste. The people who were sitting in a restaurant in Paris a week ago and were killed were people like you and I. If they'd been embryos, they'd have lived in a world where 1/3 of them would be dead a week later, even without somebody shooting them. This is a different world. And it's a world that's so different that while I find it awesome, I also think it is inappropriate to call an early embryo an unborn child. It's an early embryo. It may go one way and go so badly wrong that nature expels it from the uterus spontaneously. Even when a woman's missed her first period, 15% of women who know they're pregnant because she's missed her first period have a spontaneous abortion. And most of those spontaneous abortions are abnormal embryos. Spontaneous abortion is a necessary healing process. There are no moral absolutes in early human reproduction. This is the sort of clumps of cells I was studying when my eyes clouded over with the emotion with the electron microscope. This actually is a real needle, and somebody cleverly got a molar on top of it. I cannot distinguish between a mouse molar and a human molar or hippopotamus molar. They're all very similar at that stage. But what would you do if you were faced with a clinic where there's a nurse who's running around the place, and you also know that there were 10 human embryos stored in liquid nitrogen, and you only have time to rescue one item? You're going to drag the nurse out, or you're going to pick the embryos out of the liquid nitrogen because there's so many of them. They're all potential human beings. I think most of us, I hope all of us, would rescue the nurse. Is this a human baby? Would anybody in this room kill this baby? I wouldn't. If you had your eye clippers, I think you'd be 100% certain this is a baby. But if a doctor had known what was going on in this pregnancy and had not killed this baby, that doctor would have lost his license and been fined an enormous amount of money. Because this was an embryo that developed entirely outside its mother's uterus. It was an ectopic pregnancy. Ectopic pregnancies in some parts of the world, like Indonesia, about 1 in 80 pregnancies. The egg develops in the tube, or it may develop and stick to the liver or somewhere else. And we always remove and kill those embryos, even though very, very, very rarely, as in Billy's case, this is the ultrasound, and here is the mother's uterus, which is empty. Here's the mother's pelvic bone, and then here are parts of it. So there are no absolutes in early human development. This is a molar pregnancy. Again, in some parts of the world, about 1 in 100 pregnancies is a molar pregnancy. A molar pregnancy is the result of normal sexual intercourse. It is the result of the union of a sperm and an egg. But only the placenta develops. Remember, in early development, it's not the embryo, it's the placenta that's developing, because then the embryo can get bigger. And so a woman will have a lot of sickness because this is the placenta pouring out the hormones of pregnancy. And she may get some uterine bleeding because this mass of sort of globular tissue, or placental tissue, is growing very rapidly, but there's no embryo to infuse it with blood, so there's no way to remove the liquids it's taking from the mother's circulation. And so we remove, every gynecologist is going to remove a molar pregnancy, otherwise the woman may die. But it is the union of sperm and egg and normal sexual intercourse. But we don't baptize it. We don't say it has any human rights. Every one of us in this room is here because we have a placenta. Does a placenta have human rights? Does that have a human right? So there are serious differences. And that, I think, is the core of this afternoon's our privilege that Stephanie and I have of sharing ideas with you. We have a moral duty to challenge each other, but to do it in polite and respectful ways. And you have a moral duty to think carefully about this issue, which could actually confront a good many of you, or you could be the man that has fathered a child whose girlfriend or wife is seeking an abortion. People very rarely change their opinions on abortion, and I suspect very few of you this afternoon will change your opinions. But I think what is important is you think through in greater depth why you have a particular opinion. And I think it is important to see where Steffi and I, who can respect each other and I hope be friends, also begin to divide. I think the issue is not about the moral problem of abortion or a woman's right. I really do think it is when does life begin? And so, and that, I think, is a matter of faith, not of science. And I'm an embryologist. I actually, you know, I'm sincere about this. I've never known an embryologist, I'm sure they exist, but it's not been in my circle of friends, that has not been in favour of state abortion. I was a very close friend of Bob Edwards, who had the Nobel Prize for doing the first in vitro fertilisation in Cambridge. And I joke with some sincerity that if I'd stayed in Cambridge, I'd have probably got the Nobel Prize, because Bob wanted an obstetrician who could provide him with human eggs in which he could do his experiments. And I think it was a great step forward for women to be able to have in vitro fertilisation. I don't think that, you know, that Bob or I or most other people would say that fertilisation is this huge defining point. But let's look at a theologian, perhaps the most distinguished of Catholic theologians of the 20th century. And I'm always sorry I didn't take the opportunity to meet him. I had a very good friend, Father Francis near Berkeley, who knew him. But when I heard him, he said the moment of installment, or the moment of conception, in the fullest sense of the beginning of the human person, does not belong to the date of revelation. In other words, we have to make that choice ourselves. And we make it at different times. And even people who provide abortions will have a different criteria for when they would cease to provide them. But we have to think about that issue carefully. And the Supreme Court ruling did not say that abortion is right or wrong. All it said is that there is not agreement with those trained in respective disciplines of medicine, philosophy, and theology are unable to arrive at consensus of when does life begin. Then it's not the role of the judiciary to make this decision. So, I see development, and I think we all see development, and Stephanie sees development. We both see it as a continuous process. When we're faced with a continuous biological process, we need to make some arbitrary decisions about when certain things happen. So let's look at a less emotional, but still difficult sequence, and that is the continuum of development after birth. And society has to make arbitrary decisions. It's a totally arbitrary decision at what age you can drive an automobile or vote. But there has to be a decision. And so we divide up life into things that you can do. I would look at the embryo, particularly from the point of view of brain development. We have a consensus that we will turn off life support systems when a person's brain is dead. My previous wife was brain dead in my arms. And I was ringing up my friends and saying, Marcy's dead. Her heart was still beating. But she was dead because her brain wasn't functioning. And so for me, and people can have other criteria, the criteria when I was stopped doing abortion is when the nervous system is fully functioning. This is a theological issue because this is a beautiful painting by Crivelli in the National Gallery in London. It's almost as big as it is now on the screen. It's the Annunciation. Angels are telling Mary that she's carrying a Christ child. And here's a sort of image of something divine in heaven. This kind of laser beam. It's got a special window here with a little dove on it. And it is trying to, the artist is trying to capture the idea that there was a moment of ensoulment, which doesn't coincide with fertilization. That was never the theological teaching. The Catholic Church does not teach, some people, members of it may say this, but it doesn't teach that life begins at fertilization. It says we don't know when life begins, so we must be cautious. So what do? I see decisions about abortion within society as ones to do with tolerating diversity of opinion between sincere people. And I think the wording of the Vatican II, Dignitatis Humanae, is really quite beautiful. All persons have a right to religious liberty, a right with its foundation in the essential dignity of each human being. All persons must be free to seek the truth without coercion. So I think that we need to agree to disagree because we don't know, or because there are different opinions about what life is. There are different criteria for defining a human being. And so I think we're a rich and wonderful and diverse society. We should build on and respect that diversity. So I do think that the law is important. I 100% agreement with what Stephanie is doing to say, you have got to think about whether abortion is something you would wish to have if you were faced with that issue. My experience is that people who say, I'm never going to have abortion, actually feel very differently when they're pregnant. But you don't know how you're going to feel until you're in that situation. But you need to make decisions about that, and that's why we gathered here today. And so my personal perspective is that a woman knows more about her situation than anyone else. She needs information on which to make her own personal decision. And if that decision is to end the pregnancy, and I have the skill to do that, and she asks me, and I explain to her what the risks are, then that is something that I would do, and I have found it, in many cases, a very rewarding thing. I've been able to change a woman's whole life trajectory with a 5-minute operation. So I will stop there. I think we're going to have a break. And then so while we're having a break, please think about your questions, and we'll do our best to answer them and make them as difficult as possible.
All right, so for our Q&A session, it's going to be a little bit different than usual. So we're going to have both of our speakers come up to the stage, one on either side. Then two of the TAs will handle each of the microphones. If you'd like to ask a question for the speaker on the right-hand side, please make a line here. And if you'd like to ask a question for the speaker on the left, please make a line there. If your question applies to both speakers, again, either line. Just a word of caution again, remember to be respectful, engage with the ideas of the speakers and not with them personally. And yeah, so hopefully we'll have a really great Q&A session.
You guys are welcome to line up.
Hi, I'm Lauren. You spoke about how women consider abortion need to support or address need more support, to address the underlying issues or their reasoning. You used an example of Jerry, who was afraid of physical harm, and mentioned women whose children would be born into poverty. It seems difficult to address these circumstantial issues as many anti-choice politicians are also against funding public programs that aid women in these situations, like women, infants, and children, or temporary aid for needy families. Even with strong public aid programs, physical harm is still a real concern for women that is not able to be addressed through policy. So my question is, how do you suppose this complex physical, emotional, and financial support would manifest itself for women?
Great question. Thank you for the opportunity to address that. When you look at, let's say, more conservative individuals who would be anti-abortion but not seem to support the public funding of certain programs that would seem to help women in crisis, I think an important question to ask is, are these individuals against helping women in crisis, or are they against a specific program, but they have an alternative program? So I think, from my experience and observation, if someone is against a certain policy of maybe government funding something, it's not that they don't think the people who would receive the government funding should get help. They think they should get help a different way, such as through privately funded programs, for example. So I can say, having grown up in the pro-life movement and worked in it my whole adult life, I have seen countless examples of, you could say, more conservative-minded individuals helping women through the crisis of the unplanned pregnancy, but perhaps not in the way that you're suggesting. And I think a good example is the story of Nadej, that student that I had met. This was a privately funded pregnancy center and home for pregnant women that she got connected to. And then it was her relationship with the couple that was involved in the program that she then forged really a family relationship. She calls them her adoptive parents. So people like Nadej are helped by conservative individuals, but not necessarily with the particular programs you have in mind. The problem is if you don't support helping people at all. But in my experience, pro-life people do support, but in different kinds of ways with different kinds of approaches. So that's where I think in summary of what you're suggesting is both sides of the debate, so to speak, women in crisis need support, can agree that's a reality. Where there is often disagreement is in the policy to solve that problem. But both sides have solutions. It's that they might not have the same solutions, but they agree it's a problem. So the people that helped Nadej agree it's a problem that people like her did not support, but they chose private options of personal funding as opposed to government funded programs.
Hi there. So my question. Hi there.
You might need to run the microphone over, I'm not sure. You thought they choreographed that.
Thank you. Okay, so my question has less to do with abortion and more to do with the meaning of life and the age of viability. I read an article on the New York Times a couple months ago, and it discussed the 24-week viability in the age of life for a lot of places, and how a lot of the newer advancements and changes are basically leading to mothers having births sooner than 24 weeks, which comes at an increased risk because there's more challenges with prior to 24-week births. But it raised this interesting problem of the meaning of life and age of viability, because on one hand, some mothers want to be able to have abortions later, and others were actually wanting to have births when their babies were coming, but were actually being turned away by hospitals and doctors. And my question is this: is the age of life defined as nothing more as a risk versus benefit ratio, or is it defined by some actual scientific meaning?
I think that's, can you hear all right? I think that's an interesting question. Personally, I think it's an individual choice that people try to make based on the evidence that's available. So I try to make that choice. I personally think there is a very big ethical difference between an abortion at 6 weeks and 16 weeks. And I would like to see abortion done as early as possible. And I'm worried that there are often barriers that are preventable in getting an abortion early in pregnancy. So if you live in Louisiana and all the clinics are being closed down, and you've got to find the money to go to Oregon or somewhere, then time is hazard. You have to wait until you end up being made abortion. So I think we should do everything that enables us to do abortions early in pregnancy. And I think there has to be a cut-off time, and that is very individual, and people will differ. And I've changed my own opinion on that at different times compared to where I was. It's still a difficult problem to make.
Do I respond to that? Do you want me to comment as well? Or?
Yes, please, I can go back in first.
In terms of, 6 weeks versus 16 weeks, as Dr. Cox just said, I think it gets back to the point that I was making earlier, which is that to talk about 6 weeks or 16 weeks is to imply something happened 6 weeks ago or 16 weeks ago that we thought significant enough to count the passage of time. Not before, not after, but at that moment, and then we got to 6 weeks or we got to 16. What's the difference between 16 weeks and 15 weeks and 6 days? What's the difference between 7 weeks and 6 weeks and 6 days? All we're talking about is the passage of time, which is increasing the age of an individual, but then we get back to we're discriminating based on age if we deprive younger humans of the right to live simply because they're younger than older humans. And in terms of your question, insofar as it relates to the topic of viability, this is why human rights should be grounded in being human and not in being grounded in either our age or our ability to care for someone, because that changes So viability is changing based on technology. There have been babies that have survived at 21 weeks, even though the age of 24 weeks is typically where people consider viability. But if you're in an African village, not even 24 weeks is viability. So again, do we have an inherent right to life because we're human, or is our right to life grounded in the technology that we have? And those who would draw the line at viability are really grounding it in technology, which is going to change based on where you are in the world right now, or now versus 50 years ago.
Hi, Stephanie. So your argument against abortion for sexual assault or rape victims was that it would cause even more trauma to the victim. However, wouldn't it be even more traumatic for them to go through the entire process, give birth to the rapist child, and potentially even have to raise that child?
In terms of, you said that I said that abortion should not happen in cases of rape because it would cause more trauma. I don't believe I actually said it would cause more trauma. What I said is it won't undo the rape. So an abortion won't unrape a rape victim. I think the case can be made, and there's a documentary out doing that, that some women have come forward and talked about how their abortion was a trauma added on top of the rape. A friend of mine was raped and had an abortion, and she says that it was more difficult for her to find healing from the abortion than it was from the rape. Those are her words, not mine. But fundamentally, my point that abortion is wrong in cases of rape is grounded in the idea that humans have human rights based on being human, not based on who our parents are. That doesn't mean it's going to be easy for a rape victim to carry that pregnancy to term. I'm not presenting that it is. It can be excruciatingly difficult because that individual has been traumatized. I'm simply pointing out that we have to ask ourselves, is it fair to give someone the death penalty because of their father's crime? Even in your country, where you have the death penalty in some states, the rapists won't get the death penalty. So we're talking about giving a consequence to the innocent child that isn't even given to the rapists themselves. It doesn't mean it's going to be easy to live out, and that's often where it gets difficult for people, because to live out my position is not an easy position, but that doesn't mean we shouldn't do it. We have to ask ourselves what's the right thing to do, not what is going to be the less difficult or the more difficult thing to do. Dr. Constantine?
I've been there, and I'll be honest, I still don't know whether what I did was right or wrong. In 1972, there was a horrific war between East and West Pakistan, what we now call Bangladesh, when it's freedom. During the end of that war, probably 100,000 women were raped. I led the medical team that looked after very, very few of those women who were seeking that we could get at. Most of them, I don't think there's an adult now in Bangladesh with a Pakistani father that was raped a woman. Because they didn't care for them, they dropped them down the valley, they killed them. They went to the local unsafe sources to solve their problem. There is a difference. Rape is a terrible thing. But rape and seeing a child every day that you know was the product of rape is a more painful, lifelong situation than simply having a rape. And the girls that we were looking after were 12 years old. If you'll excuse the phrase, one of my doctor colleagues said, I can't even have people there. What do you do with the 12? They were so small, they were so young, as gynecologists we don't even think how pregnant they are, because they were so tiny. And we did very late abortions. Stephanie's pictures of abortions are perfectly accurate. They're larger than they are, but you are destroying something. We were destroying very late pregnancies. And that was the most harrowing time of my life. And these are difficult things, and I don't think there's a simple solution. But the only time those girls ever smiled was when their pregnancy was ended. And Mother Teresa came up from Calcutta to berate us for doing abortion. And the fascinating thing was, everybody in Dhaka knew where we were doing abortions. Everybody knew the address. She spoke the language of these people, and only part of that team spoke the language. She didn't go to talk to a 12-year-old girl and say, don't have an abortion. She claimed to be raped by a friend in an Intercontinental Hotel and told not to do abortion. And he was a psychologist. He thought, that's telling us something. It's incredibly difficult to look at a 12-year-old girl with 5 eyes, was pregnant, with very bad hair, and not going to have that.
Is there an opportunity to respond to that, or how? Because I will if I can, but you guys, yeah. So this is where we have to ask ourselves, are we making decisions about what's difficult or about what's right? What is our measuring stick? Of course, we're going to feel emotions we can't even put into words at the thought of a 12-year-old not only raped, but then pregnant as a result of that rape. Of course, we're going to be horrified that that has happened. We agree on that. If the measuring stick for choices we make is what seems easier in the moment, then in the moment it's going to seem like having an abortion is easier. But if our measuring stick is what's right or what's wrong, we have to ask ourselves, is it fair, is it ethical to kill an innocent child because the father of the child has committed a horrifying crime? Let's imagine one of these girls didn't realize that she was pregnant until way later, didn't tell anyone until she gave birth. Would we kill the child after birth because the father was a rapist? Would we kill the child after birth because every day she looked into the eyes of the newborn baby, she was reminded of the rapist? If we wouldn't take our bare hands and dismember the body of a newborn baby, why would we do that with a preborn child? And the only difference between the preborn child and the born child is one of age. The younger you are, the less developed you will be. But it doesn't mean you're not human, because if your parents are human, biologically you are human as well. Dr. Potts showed a picture of a morula and said, you know, of another species it would look the same way. Well, that's why we would run a DNA test. If you found some meat on the ground, you would run a DNA test to know whether someone dropped some cow meat or whether someone had just killed a human, and that's a piece of the human body. On the surface, two things can look the same, but deep down be very different. So early in pregnancy, the morula, the blastocyst, the zygote may look like the morula, blastocyst, and zygote of another species, but you run a DNA test, and we're going to know very quickly whether we're dealing with the same species that we're in, or a different species. So the question is, do humans have human rights? And if humans have human rights, we have those rights because we're human. And therefore, those rights can't be taken away from us just because our fathers have committed horrifying crimes. And so that's what we have to keep coming back to. It doesn't mean it's going to be easy to live out.
Hi, Stephanie. So many rape victims who have abortions do it because they live in immense amount of poverty and don't want to put their...
Sorry? I just missed what you said. Many victims of rape do it.
Victims that have abortions do it because they live in poverty and don't want to put their children through that. So you may not be able to unrape a victim, but you can prevent many, many years of suffering and poverty for the mother and the child. So you say that the solution to this all is to support the women instead of abortion. So can you please tell me what specifically you have done to alleviate poverty, and what you have done to not continue the cycle of poverty, what you have not done, what have you done to prevent rape? And please don't tell me that this is not your job or field, as you are telling me that is your job to help women.
Okay, so in terms of your focus on what I have personally done, because this is an academic institution and it's about being intellectually honest. What your tactic is in your question is to try to get people to think that if I personally haven't done anything, that my position is invalid. That, in the world of fallacies and argumentation, is what's called an ad hominem attack, an attack on someone's character rather than their argument. I could have done a million things to help victims of rape. I could have done a million things to address poverty. What then would your argument be to refute the evidence that I've provided that life begins at fertilization, and we all agree humans have human rights, and so if the preborn is human, it's wrong to deprive that human of their basic right to live. So we have to be intellectually honest here, and I'm not going to put forward what I have or haven't done when that is not relevant to determining the morality of whether it's ethical or not to end the life of an innocent human being. So yes, we need to alleviate suffering and not eliminate sufferers. How much I've done or how little I've done is irrelevant. And here's an example of that. Friends of mine had adopted 2 children, and someone came up and said, well, have you adopted any children? In a context of an abortion debate. And my friend responded, yes, in fact, I've adopted 2. And the woman's immediate response was, why haven't you adopted 3? So, I mean, it goes to show that you almost can't satisfy someone who's looking for a way to overlook the main argument being proposed. So me talking about what I've done in my personal life and how many friends I've journeyed with and the work in a pregnancy center and all of that doesn't change whether my position is right or wrong. So if my position is wrong, it needs to be refuted based on refuting the arguments I've made, not trying to claim that I maybe possibly haven't helped enough people, which I'm not even going to discuss to what extent I have.
I think that's a very reasonable thing to say. In my experience of helping women have safe abortions, I would summarize it in one sentence. I think most women decide to terminate pregnancy because they know they cannot give their child if born the love and security that every child deserves. They do it because they love. Having told you about the most harrowing experience, let me tell you about just one termination of pregnancy, a woman quite early in pregnancy in the Philippines, where abortion is illegal. But number one fact is, if you're rich in any country in this world, you buy yourself a safe abortion. If you're poor, you may have a very bad one. This was the wife of a fisherman with a very insecure income in the southern Philippines, and she had 2 children who were in school. She had got pregnant for the 3rd time in a loving relationship with her husband, but she knew that if she had the 3rd child, she would not be able to keep her children in school. So she was asking for a safe abortion. And I was actually using that in inspiration. And on this side, there was a Catholic woman doctor, and on this side, there was a Muslim woman doctor. And fortunately, the procedure was made simply. And the woman, after about 5 minutes, got this was in the hospital, which was in some of the place. She got off the couch. It was quite a dark room. And the doors opened at the end, and the sun flooded in. And waiting outside was her husband and the 2 children. And the woman rushed up to her husband and embraced him like this, so passionately. And the Catholic doctor leaned across me and said to the Muslim doctor, I may go to hell afterwards, but that woman is in heaven now.
If I could just respond to that, Dr. Potts, what you're doing is making an emotional appeal. A story of someone who had an abortion and felt good about it. Stories could be made about people who have abortions and don't feel good about it, which is why we have to get to the core of the argument. You mentioned that women may do abortions because of love. And I'm not going to dispute that someone may have good motivations for the choice that they make. Equally, someone could have a 5-year-old, an 8-year-old, and a 12-year-old in Africa and feel that they can't care for all 3, and feel that to end the life of the 5-year-old child will enable them to truly support and raise the 8-year-old and the older child. Would we ever say that just because they're motivated by love for the older children, that it's okay to kill the 5-year-old? And if not, then just because someone may be motivated by love for some older child, it doesn't mean it's okay to kill the younger child, in this case, who was older.
This is very interesting. That never happened. I've never heard of a woman killing her 5-year-old children. I've seen hundreds, thousands of women.
Could we stop for just a second? Sorry. Don't mean to cut anyone off. I just want to reiterate again that this is an open discussion forum, and it's meant to critically engage all of you as well as the speakers. It's very important to realize that this is a different subject for some people, and if you do feel uncomfortable, feel free to step outside for a few moments if you'd like. Something else I'd like to mention is that as the speakers as well as both the speakers have mentioned, please only engage with the speakers' ideas and not with them personally. They've taken time out of their busy schedules to come visit us. Most of them are very, really nice, and we really appreciate them. And we definitely want to leave this room with better understanding, as well as more participation for everyone around us. So please be mindful of your fellow students as well as so thank you very much.
So we were just talking about when each of us is asked, we get one response each to the other, but not beyond that. Yeah.
And I'd like to reiterate, thank you so much for coming and seeing this. I just have a question actually for both of you, but especially for Professor Potts, who touched on the overpopulation crisis in the world. What are your thoughts on the one-child policy?
The question is about the one-child policy. Interestingly enough, it came very late in the demographic transition in China. If China had started voluntary family planning when Taiwan or South Korea did, they probably would never have done it. A lot of my Chinese friends say, well, our economic growth took place because of this. Very, very bad things happened during the one-child family, including coercive abortions, which I hope everybody in this room would think is totally unacceptable.
The one-child policy is showing the problems of it now, the serious imbalance in China of more men than women, and that's then leading to things like human trafficking, where women are being trafficked in from other countries. So when we make a decision to impact people's freedom to decide their family size, then it's going to result not only in skewed populations like China has, but then it leads to life-ending choices that are made. Not only is abortion of female fetuses very common in China, but infanticide, so of female infants, is also common. So even when Dr. Potts says, well, I don't ever see stories of people killing their born kids, well, that is happening in China and India, where little baby girls who are born are being drowned and killed in other ways. And so if it's wrong then, it's also going to be wrong before birth too. It's just an age difference.
So you've been talking a lot about ageism and age discrimination for embryos. However, there's a global consensus that age begins the moment you're born. We don't celebrate our 9-month, the day we're born, we're 0. So I'm just wondering how you would respond.
Great question. So that's actually a cultural thing. There are some Asian cultures that actually age you as 1 when you're born. And I was actually just in Ontario with a number of women from South Korea. And so they consider themselves a year older than their birth date. So I would say there's 2 extremes to be avoided. One that adds 3 months to your life that you never existed for, which would be considering you 1 at birth, and one that excludes the first 9 months of your life, which is our common standard over here in North America, which ignores the fact that you existed for 9 months. So I would say the cultural practice that we have is a practical one. We can note down to the day, the hour, the minute, and the second that you were born, but most of us, if not all of us, don't know down to the day, minute, hour, and second that we were conceived. So it's a practical matter that we don't know our conception days because someone may have had sex on Monday, the sperm is in their body, and they ovulate on Tuesday. So you think they got pregnant on Monday, but they actually got pregnant on Tuesday. So it's a practical thing we can't know down to the moment. But I actually do celebrate conception days by way of estimating. So it is something that can be done.
So my question has to do with the concept of human life, and your guys' differing views. So correct me if I'm wrong, but Professor Potts, I think that you view human life as more of a spectrum. These are way in, and it might be related to the development of the nervous system. Is that kind of right, a spectrum? It's not binary.
Yes, that's my personal way of looking at things, yes.
Okay, and you, it's a little more binary for you, right? You think that it starts with fertilization and ends in death.
Yeah, although I would say that's not my view, but what science tells me.
Okay.
And so I can't ignore something that's blatantly obvious. A sperm will never grow into an adult, but a human embryo will. Not into a human, because they already are human, but they will grow into an older human the way a 2-year-old will grow into an adult.
So, and then I guess, now that I kind of framed your guys' views on human life and binary spectrum, just kind of, for you, what makes a human is the DNA, and you kept saying that, you know, preborn child, and and for you, you thought that the nervous system was kind of oriented on the spectrum. So I just kind of, my question is, how do you think that we can take these two views and ever come to a consensus? How do you think that we can take it more binary and a spectral view, and what will it take to merge these ideas or come to a compromise? Why do you view them so differently? There's a lot in there, but there's just a lot of questions that I feel like you might be able to elaborate and clarify.
I don't think there's a compromise between the two views. I think you listen to people who, and both Stefan and I trying to express why we come to our particular individual opinions. And I think that all the evidence is that we're going to live in a world that has those two opinions, so that public policy has to take that divergency into account, because they're both opinions and conclusions by sincere people who want the best for the world out there. And I just don't see fertilization as this fantastic proof of uniqueness. That little morula I showed you on the needle, that could turn into a placenta without a baby, it could turn into an ectopic pregnancy, turn into an ectopic baby with no brain. We don't know what it's going to do. And to give it the rights, in inverted commas, for human being, I think is, in my opinion, inappropriate.
So to address your question, I would say that the question about when life begins in terms of how Dr. Potts has presented his answer versus my own, I would say comes down to, are you basing your explanation on science or on convenience or some other motivation? So again, we have to get back to, with other species, there's no debate. It's clear life begins at fertilization. When scientists want to create life, there's no debate. They're going to replicate the moment of fertilization. That's what they're trying to make in the lab. So we know life begins then. From fertilization onwards, you have an organism. So the embryo has a trajectory in mind and is working in a coordinated fashion to become an adult, not become a human. In terms of hydatidiform moles or molar pregnancy that Dr. Potts referred to, that article that I mentioned, I want to recommend again, by Dr. Maureen Condick, When Does Human Life Begin? And she speaks about hydatidiform moles within this document, and she basically says hydatidiform moles or where fertilization has gone wrong. So you, as I talked about with composition behavior, at fertilization you have the genetic material of the mother and the father. That is not the case with hydatidiform moles. So she points out that hydatidiform moles only contain paternally derived chromosomes, not maternally derived chromosomes. They behave differently from embryos. They grow in a chaotic mass of disorganized cells and tissue, which are unrelated to each other or to anything resembling a whole. So that's fertilization gone wrong. You only have the paternally derived chromosomes, not the maternally derived ones. But if you have them maternally and paternally, you have a human being. And an ectopic pregnancy is not having a human being. It's having a human being in the wrong place. As Dr. Potts pointed out, it can be in the abdomen, ectopic meaning out of the uterus. It can be in the fallopian tube. And in that case, you can solve that problem not by committing an abortion in the case of the ectopic, the tubal pregnancy, but by doing a salpingectomy, which is a surgical procedure in which the fallopian tube is removed, because without removing the part of the mother's body that exists, or that's pathological, you could say, it's going to kill her and the baby. Abortion targets the baby's body, not the mom's body. And a salpingectomy targets the tube, that's therefore the mom's body. It's fundamentally different.
But it kills an embryo that has a statistical possibility of surviving.
With a tubal, or do you mean an abdominal? Because there's a
I
difference.
don't
An
think
abdominal.
some tubal probably could survive. But some ectopic pregnancies very rarely survive. So we're divided by mathematics, not by absolutes.
Well, I would say for Dr. Potts to make that claim, he's going to have to provide one case of a tubal ectopic pregnancy that has come to birth. And there's no such case that I'm aware of that has gone to birth. The tubal ectopic pregnancy will burst. But there is cases where ectopic injuries such as the abdomen can be carried to term, and that's why you can actually, with proper care, save both the mother and the baby, monitoring that pregnancy. But a tubal pregnancy is very different, and you do a salpingectomy.
If a woman, you diagnose an ectopic pregnancy, you open the abdomen, you find that ectopic pregnancy is not in the tube, but attached to the liver, then you will take a knife and cut it out of the liver. And you would be amiss if you didn't do that.
We'll now go on to the next question.
Okay, so hi Stephanie, this was mainly for you, but also Dr. Potts, so in vitro fertilization has helped many women conceive who otherwise couldn't, but in the IVF clinic, a lot of the fertilized embryos are discarded. So how would you feel about, like, would you and other anti-choice people want to outlaw IVF, or what are your feelings on that?
Good question. In terms of IVF and the frozen embryos that are discarded, it comes down to, again, when does life begin? And again, what's the moment of celebration for the IVF specialist? It's getting the sperm sample with the egg sample, and not just either or. So we know then that fertilization is the moment where the offspring have been created. So therefore, quote unquote, discarding the embryo is killing human beings. And I would absolutely oppose that and think there should be laws against that. And that sounds absurd, and it is absurd if the embryo isn't human. But if the embryo is human, then the absurd thing is to make a whole bunch of humans and then kill those that you don't want just because they're not old enough. So again, the science hasn't been refuted, especially looking at composition and behavior, that we have something substantively different at fertilization than before. And from fertilization onwards, you're just going to change and become more mature. Getting back to that Polaroid analogy, the image is captured in an instant, but it needs to get to maturity. So all of us were captured in the instant of fertilization, but yes, we need to get to maturity. So since fertilization creates a human, then killing humans in an IVF lab would be a human rights violation, because they have the same right to life as we do.
All right, so this question is directed towards both of you, and I was just wondering, in terms of familial incest, what specific, I guess for Dr. Potts, what the specific science is around that in terms of the risks of carrying through the pregnancy in terms of the child's life, and I guess for Stephanie, if you think based on the science, if that's worth it. And I think that also emotional stories are okay, because this is an emotional issue.
So I mean, incest is a very nasty thing. Nearly all mammals have some behavioral way of preventing incest. Even tadpoles can smell another tadpole and know whether it's the same parents. And you do get more abnormalities in children born of incest, because some of the minor things can happen to chromosomes can come from both parents. So again, I think in the case of incest, particularly a young girl, you've got both rape and incest in the first same situation. And that, for me, would make me be even more convinced that that woman or girl, if she wishes it, should have a safe abortion.
Of course, incest, like rape that is not between two family members, is a horrible crime and needs serious consequences for the people doing it. It comes back to, may I ethically end the life
of what is biologically another human being, an organism, not merely a part, an organism, a human being like you or me, because their father has committed a horrifying crime. One thing I think that's important to remember in the case of incest is what is the family member routinely molesting another family member want? They want it to keep happening, and they don't want people to know about it. An abortion is going to keep it hidden, because the pregnancy would make visible what no one else knew about. So abortion can actually perpetuate incest, where that's going to keep happening because people don't know the pregnancy will be what notifies some family members in some cases. There's a documentary I alluded to, but I neglected to give the title, called Conceived and Raped, that interviews 3 categories of people: women who were raped, some of whom were victims of incest, and those who had abortions, those who didn't have abortions and they carried to term, and those who were conceived as a result of rape and they had their lives. And the women who were raped and had abortions talk about regretting their abortions. The women who were raped and carried their pregnancies to term talk about the gratefulness they have that they carried their pregnancies to term. And those who were conceived and raped say that it feels like a personal attack, that you're saying, you know, my life isn't worth living because of something that my father did. Now, in terms of what I think you were alluding to specifically is, but what if the woman's maybe going to die because there's a genetic connection that's stronger than normal? I'm not aware that let's say, a father-daughter pregnancy would result in the daughter's life being in danger, but there may be a deformity within the child herself or himself. But saying that the child is going to be deformed in some possible way is not the same as saying the mom's life is in danger. So I'm not aware of a case where, because of the close genetic tie, that her physical life would be in danger. But if it would be, what you do is you address the medical condition that would exist, but you don't directly kill the child.
I was referencing more specifically the life of the child.
You mean like if the child had a... Oh, okay. So, and then I would say again, those of us who are born and deformed in some way, maybe mentally or physically, are equal to those who have no disabilities. And so the preborn child, if they are mentally disabled or physically deformed as a result of the close genetic tie, have just as much right to live as someone who doesn't have those disabilities. Because our right to life is grounded in being human, not whether we're disabled or not.
Life is tough. I have killed one newborn child. Let me tell you why. It was an anencephalic pregnancy. That is, it had a face, but nothing behind it, no brain. It would probably have lived for 12 hours. No anencephalic lives for longer than that. As it came out of the vagina and I saw what was happening, I made sure that I squashed the umbilical cord, because I wanted that thing, which was a result of an egg and a sperm, but in my book was not a human being, a face without a brain. I wanted that to die as quickly as possible and the woman not to see it.
Those of us who may not have fully developed brains have just as much a right to live as those whose brains are more developed. And if you contact me at stephaniegray.info, I will send you an article about a woman's blog who had her anencephalic child for several months after birth. And she would completely object with the fact of her existing child to your claim that no child lives beyond 12 hours.
But the child died and she suffered on the way.
In what capacity did she suffer? Why wouldn't you give pain medication? Why wouldn't you alleviate
Because
pain?
birth is such an extraordinarily powerful thing, and you love the object that's born.
You mentioned that, murder and another human being is, there are legal consequences to that. So it's considered embryo, and then abortion is therefore, what sort of consequences do you expect from this?
Great question. In terms of what consequences I would propose for women right now, legally, who have abortions, I wouldn't, because legally a woman who has an abortion is not breaking the law. I would apply your question more to, at some future point, when abortion becomes illegal,
what should the consequences be for a woman who breaks that law that would be in existence. And I would say consistency compels me to say that if there would be consequences for a woman who drowns her born children in the bathtub, if there would be legal consequences for her breaking that law and ending the lives of those children, then of course there should be legal consequences for a woman who ends the life of her preborn child and it be breaking the law at some future point when the law exists. A lot of people would be shocked by that position, and it is only shocking if abortion doesn't kill. But if abortion does kill, and again, the evidence has been provided for that, and it hasn't been refuted, if abortion does kill, then the most shocking and horrifying thing would be to not have consequences for those who break the law that would ban the killing of innocent human beings. I think by the time the law changes on abortion, the number of women who would break that law here in America would be equivalent to the number of women who, like Andrea Yates, drowned her children in the bathtub. There aren't many women who drown their children in the bathtub, and so that's why my slogan, you could say, is make abortion unthinkable, so that whether it's legal or illegal, it doesn't even enter into the heart of a woman to do that to her preborn child, like it doesn't enter into the heart of the vast majority of women to drown their children in the bathtub.
Dr. Potts, and I was wondering what rights do you feel a father should have in an abortion decision?
The question is what rights should the father have in an abortion? And it's a question I've often thought about. And I think that if it's in a loving relationship, then the woman would wish him to discuss this and to have his input into it. If the woman does not want the input of the man because the relationship is broken down, then I would only listen to the woman. I think the man in my book has no rights.
Hi, I'm not sure how familiar you are with the Tay-Sachs disease. For in any case, Tay-Sachs disease is a developmental disease which is called genetic disorder, which causes them to lose control of the muscles, lose vision, and have constant seizures and everything that develops within the first few years of their life. There's no cure for it, but there is a blood test that you take while the child is in the mother to test whether the child has protection on. In a world without abortion, what would your solution be for alleviating that pain? Because the child goes through immense amount of pain and sadness, and the mother has to experience the entire ordeal of that, pretty much.
So in the case of conditions like Tay-Sachs disease or others where people will be in pain, the simple way of saying it is, I believe what Mike said earlier, which is we need to alleviate suffering without eliminating sufferers. I wouldn't kill someone now who's born with Tay-Sachs disease. I mean, we all have to ask ourselves, if we think that it's okay to kill them, could we put a gun in our hands, stare them in the face, and shoot them? Could we do that in good conscience? Or would we say, humans have human rights, and having a disease does not give me license to end your life? Instead, I have a responsibility to alleviate your suffering. And we have ability medically to alleviate pain. Our technology has advanced vastly than it used to be. And if we eliminate all the people who are in pain, we have no motivation to even get better than we already are at curing people's pain. So we need to kill pain, not people. And so doing a blood test while pregnant is just doing earlier what most, if not hopefully all of us, would ever do later. We never put our gun in our hand and shoot someone in the face who's 2 and has Tay-Sachs. So I'm not going to do it when they're 2 months in utero, just because they're younger and just because they may not be as developed. So it might be a little easier in my conscience. So alleviate suffering without eliminating sufferers.
How's it going? I like your dress. It's fire. Okay, so history has shown that women of color are jailed disproportionately to that of white women. So how would you address the racial disparities and socioeconomic disparities of those that would be jailed if abortion was illegal? So I'm saying, like, basically black, Latino women, and Asian women will be jailed disproportionately to that of white women if abortion was legalized or illegal, and how would you address that?
So why, basically, so you're saying that they would commit abortions to the same extent that they are now?
I'm saying that in general, if like I am a black woman, right? Is that accurate? So if I was pregnant and she was pregnant, and I got an abortion, she got an abortion, there's a high likelihood that the justice system will look at her abortion and my abortion differently. And that I'll be jailed disproportionately to what she would be jailed. Time, likelihood of jail, all those different things. So how would we address that if abortion was?
So that's a problem independent of abortion. The fact that a black woman and a white woman could both commit a crime and the white woman be let off and the black woman not, any crime, let alone if it's breaking up some future abortion law or anything else, the problem is not about abortion in that case. The problem is about basically giving people a pass if they have a certain skin color and not if they have another skin color. So that's what has to be addressed, which isn't related to abortion itself.
Which you're absolutely right, that's exactly what will happen. Because the white woman would be able to pay a doctor to do what would now be an illegal abortion, and the black woman probably couldn't afford that. So she would go somewhere else to some traditional practitioner and might become infertile or lose her life. But that won't happen because whatever the law says, now with these possible, this is a drug that everybody will always get. You can end the pregnancy in the previous privacy of their own home. So abortion laws arose because women could not terminate their pregnancies themselves. And this is the problem. And I'd like to think again, what would the world be like if some other animal had a big brain, made tools, told the language, and dominated the world? Supposing kangaroos were in that situation. They were looking at their pouches. Abortion laws were made by men to control women because women at that time could not end their pregnancy themselves. Now you can end your pregnancy. It's not perfect, but it's 9 years better than what I was dealing with 50 years ago. And it costs 5 cents and 5 cents on the old time.
How many women have abortions because they've been utterly abandoned by men?
We're going on to the next question.
Hi, Stephanie. So, do you still think it's wrong for a woman to have an abortion if it's a high-risk pregnancy in terms of her health? And so if she would continue the pregnancy, she was likely to die?
If a woman's life is in danger while she's pregnant, there are ways to address her medical condition that don't involve abortion. So saying that I would be against killing her child to help her doesn't mean I'm against helping her. It's kind of like, if you look at the end result of passing an exam in class, you can pass the exam by studying hard, or you can pass the exam by cheating. Well, it's the same result, you pass either way, but one way is not ethical. Well, just because you can't go that way doesn't mean there's not another way. You study hard. So in the same way, I'm all for the end result of saving the woman's life. All I'm saying is, you can't save her by way of killing the child, but you can save her by way of addressing her medical condition. So the one quick example, again, is doing a salpingectomy in the case of a tubal pregnancy. Another example, if she has chorioamnionitis, so the presence of infected membranes, and it's prior to viability, you can induce labor to expel the infected membranes, but obviously the induction of labor is going to result in the birth of the child as well. If we have the technology to then save the baby's life, we would do that. If it's before viability, then we wouldn't have the technology. And being incapable of saving the child when you eliminate an infection from the mother's body is very different from directly going in and killing the child. So all I'm saying is, let's address the pathology, let's address the condition of the pregnant woman, but let's not do it by way of directly killing the child. Thank you.
And before we continue on real quick, we're just going to take a couple more questions and then we're going to stop the Q&A. And a quick note is Stephanie actually has to run and catch a flight after, so she won't be available for our conversation, but we'll put up her contact information on the BCourses page, and you guys can contact her through that.
My question is for those of you seem to like abortion, like they're going to take abortion and then abortion being morally wrong. Do you think it would be beneficial able to have better sex ed, and like therefore we would prevent more pregnancies through sex ed versus discussing abortion. So like changing the focus earlier, so providing people with access to birth control and like better sex ed programs.
I think it's very important to give people access to birth control, and there are a lot of unnecessary barriers that prevent the women in this room getting oral contraceptives. Should be sold in gas stations. That's what the science tells us. So we should make things easily available, yes. And I think that everybody that's done abortions like myself is very enthusiastic about family planning. And I think I have a moral responsibility, and I've always done this. If I terminated somebody's pregnancy, to say, have you thought about family planning? Are you going to be risk of another pregnancy? Can I help you in some way? And to give that person information. Because the woman who, in my experience, clinical experience, is most receptive to contraception and most likely to use it consistently is the woman who's just had an abortion. So by making abortion legal and safe, I think in a 5-year period you probably do less abortions.
So I hear two things in your question. One is this reference to unsafe abortions, and then the other one is what about sexual education? What should be our solution there? So in terms of unsafe abortions or safe abortions, that statement, especially safe abortions, is making an assumption. The assumption there being that the child before birth is not human. Because if the preborn child is human, abortion is never safe for that human. So we have to ask ourselves is, can we make it safer for someone to kill one human because they might get hurt in the process of killing? You know, we're not going to give a man who beats his wife boxing gloves to preserve his hand from any harm when he beats his wife. Because what he's doing when he hurts his hand is hurting someone else. So if what I'm doing when I hemorrhage or risk my life is killing an offspring of myself, my child, then you shouldn't legalize the killing of one's offspring to make it safer for the person doing the killing. And I would point out, in contrast to what Dr. Potts said when he had some statistics up, is if you email me as the info will be provided in the Lancet, a medical journal, they published stats about maternal mortality deaths in El Salvador, Chile, Poland, Nicaragua, and South Africa. And in El Salvador, Chile, Poland, and Nicaragua, abortion was made illegal and maternal deaths continued to decrease. In South Africa, abortion was made legal and maternal deaths increased. So the real issue is providing good medical care. In terms of sexual education, I think we absolutely do need to do a better job educating people about sexuality. And a whole other debate is how do we best do that? Is it, as Dr. Potts said, you know, handing out birth control in gas stations? Or is it educating people about committed relationships and so on and so forth? So that's a whole other debate, but I think that debate needs to be had, and we need to look at better strategies for educating people about the nature and purpose of sexuality.
Hi. First of all, I just want to thank Stephanie for coming to a place as liberal as UC Berkeley and being brave enough to stand up on stage and make solid with us. My question is similar to a question earlier about increasing worldwide population, but not specific to the one-child policy in China. My question, I would just like to hear both of your thoughts on this increasing worldwide population and how abortion does make a difference, you know, in slowing down that rate of increasing population. If abortion were to be abolished, you know, population would definitely be rising more rapidly, and we would face more intense problems more quickly regarding climate change and overpopulation of cities. So I would just like to hear both of your thoughts on that.
Great question. Thank you, because I didn't really address that at all, so I appreciate the opportunity to. I recommend 2 more documentaries, Demographic Winter and Demographic Bomb, which actually make the opposite suggestion that you've made. Not that the world is overpopulated, but that the world is underpopulated. So I would suggest that when we think of overpopulation, we think of countries in which the real problem is not too many people, but poverty. The real problem is mismanagement of resources, and the real problem is bad governments that are seriously violating human rights. If you look at some U.S. states, they're more densely populated than China. But why would we say China is overpopulated and those U.S. states aren't?
because it comes back to human rights violations, mismanagement of resources, and so forth. I always like to tell people, come to Canada, because we are not overpopulated, we're underpopulated, and your country is like my country. If we did not have immigration, we'd be in serious trouble. And we kind of already are in trouble, because we're not replacing our older population with enough younger population. So immigration is helping that, but only so far. There are now incentives in Russia and other parts, in places like Western Europe, where people are given incentives to have children because they're not replacing at proper levels. So where people are claiming overpopulation is where you've got poor countries. And would we kill all the people who were born in those countries to solve overpopulation? I don't think so. So if we wouldn't kill them because they're who are born, neither should we kill those who are preborn to solve what I wouldn't even say is a problem. I would say there's other problems. But even if overpopulation was the problem, I'm not going to kill you to solve overpopulation. So why should I kill a preborn child to solve overpopulation?
The current theme that does separate us is, Stephanie's called it a preborn child, and basically it's murder if you kill it. I say it's an embryo. It's not yet, I wouldn't give it human rights at that stage. Otherwise, I wouldn't do abortion. And I know that it's difficult that you have to have an ending point for doing abortions. But I know very well what I destroy. Stephanie's pictures are perfectly accurate. They're a little bit bigger than they are in the operating theatre. And this is a tough subject. But that is the big divide. Do you give the status of human rights to a fertilized egg? I do not do that. And I know a lot about fertilized eggs.
I think you kind of just answered one of the questions I had. I was going to ask you, because so far you've given so many examples about people that are in a really bad situation about why it's reasonable for them to have an abortion. I was going to ask you about your opinion of a woman that has the whole capacity to, bear a child, have given a good life, and your opinion on whether or not that woman should be able to have an abortion. But now my question shifts more to, when do you consider a baby viable, that it would be wrong for someone to try to terminate life?
I think I know, and we all know what a newborn baby looks like. I think I know what an embryo at 16, or fetus at 16 weeks looks like. I think we have to make decisions, and that is difficult. I mean, life is beautifully simple if all fertilized eggs have human rights. There's no problems, no ethical problems for anybody. You know what to do. End of discussion. I think the world's a pretty complicated place. I think there's a lot of suffering in this world. I think it's totally unrealistic to think you will create a world where some women don't wish and need to have an abortion. In relation to your question, which is one I often thought about, what do you do with a woman who really is very cavalier and has booked a cruise to Alaska and it coincides with pregnancy, she wants that pregnancy aborted? If she was that stupid, I think she's going to be a very bad mother.
My question, Stephanie, addresses your statement that you want to make abortion unthinkable. So first of all, when I think of a future society in which that is the status quo, it makes me a little uncomfortable that in that society everyone would have essentially been coerced into believing the same thing, as opposed to a society in which there's a policy that embraces tolerance and all different viewpoints. And second of all, on a more practical level, I was wondering how you would address sort of like logistically going from legal abortions to this state where it's unthinkable for everyone, how you address all the women that would be harmed and in that process and all the unsafe abortions that would be had.
So in terms of women being a future world where abortion isn't permissible and women therefore being coerced into holding that view and therefore seeming intolerant, if you are against rape, you are intolerant to rape. And that should be okay in your mind. In fact, if it's not okay in your mind, I'm seriously concerned. If you're against killing 2-year-olds, you're being intolerant to those who are in favor of killing 2-year-olds. And I'm okay with that. So I'm okay being intolerant to raping people. I'm okay being intolerant to stealing from other people things that aren't yours. I don't think it's okay to do those things. So yes, I'm intolerant towards that. So it's okay to be intolerant towards the killing of a child. We shouldn't be inclusive about that. We force people all the time to hold beliefs like rape is wrong and killing people is wrong and beating up a stranger is wrong, because we have consequences in the law for people who do those things. So let's be clear, it shouldn't be a problem that we have laws that prevent harm to other humans. So my vision, you could say, of a world where there's no abortion is only unreasonable if the preborn child is a human. But again, we're back to the evidence has been provided for the preborn child being human. Notice that Dr. Potts didn't like the phrase preborn child, but let's break it down. They have parents, so they're a child. I'm a child of my parents, so that's a technicality. They are children, they're offspring, and preborn, they are before birth. So preborn child is actually a very accurate statement. So is embryo, the way the term toddler, teenager, and adult are labels to refer to age ranges, but it's still an age range. And Dr. Potts said that he wouldn't give human rights at that stage. Well, notice what he's admitting, that he doesn't believe humans get human rights. Only humans who are a certain stage of development, which is a certain age, get human rights. Then that's not a belief in human rights. That's a belief in age-based rights, which flies in the face of human rights doctrines like the ones that I've mentioned. So then in terms of when abortion becomes illegal and women right now disagree with the idea that there's going to be large numbers of women doing so, but at that point, when abortion becomes illegal, it comes down to if you get hurt in the process of harming a 5-year-old, do we make it legal and safer for you to harm a 5-year-old? And if the answer is no, then in the same way, if someone gets hurt in the process of harming a preborn child, we don't make it legal and quote-unquote safer to do so. But see how it all my analogies rise or fall on whether the preborn child is human. Like, everything I'm saying is ludicrous if the baby is not a human like you or me. But I see no evidence to refute the sperm egg fusion being the moment that each of us began our lives. All I've heard is the fact that that child is younger, and that child is less developed, and that child isn't viable, and all that could be said about newborn children.
So my question is, what's the solution for someone that doesn't want to keep their child? If they don't want to be the mother to it, then I guess they can give it up to another family or like foster care. But that's a broken system. A lot of children go into abusive homes. So what's the right thing to do? What's the correct solution?
Great question. Do you want to answer first, Dr. Paul? I would say I'm glad you mentioned foster care, because I think it's very important to distinguish foster care from adoption. And then when people talk about a messed up system, foster care, you can definitely apply that label too. But there are people waiting to adopt newborn babies. And so if instead of a child being placed in foster care and bounced from home to home to home until they're 5 or 6, if that child was placed into an adopted home, there would be an adopted home waiting for them. There's been great success with adoption, but I'll admit some really tragic failures within the foster care system. So as alternatives to abortion, I would suggest 3 things based on 3 women that I've encountered. So the first is Nadej, who had no support from her social circle and sought it out from a pregnancy center that had a home for pregnant women and that journeyed with women after the pregnancy as well, which is very important. The other thing I would suggest is from a student I met named Veronica, and she was abandoned by her boyfriend, pressured to have abortion by her girlfriends who had had abortions, and she told her parents she was pregnant. And so she was lucky enough that in her case, her parents said, we're moving you home and we're going to help you out. So for some people, they think their parents wouldn't be supportive, but in the case of Veronica, actually telling them they were very supportive. But if they're not like Veronica's parents, then there's Nadej, who got help from a pregnancy center. And the third case is a student I met in Minnesota a few months ago who said that when she got pregnant, her parents pressured her to have an abortion. And she felt that she could not do that, but she couldn't convince them why it was wrong. So she basically had nothing to do with her parents for the duration of the pregnancy. And she knew a couple that had lost 3 children at different points in their life to unexpected and tragic deaths. and she thought, I want to place my baby for adoption. And so she chose that couple, and she placed her child for adoption. And then her own father asked for her forgiveness when the baby was born for wanting his grandchild killed. And that relationship got repaired, and this couple that had lost 3 children now were the happy adopted parents, because this girl felt she couldn't give her child, but she wanted the child to have. So 3 stories, 3 solutions.
And I'm happy for each one of those stories. The trouble is, this year, 40 million women will have an abortion. There aren't 40 million happy solutions. This time next week, I'll be in Benin City, Nigeria, at a meeting of gynecologists, and I'll be talking about ways in which I think we can greatly prevent those 26,000 women dying from unsafe abortions in Africa this year. And I'm doing that because I will not give human rights to an early embryo, and I'm proud to do that. I may be wrong, and Stephanie may be wrong, and I think that should be a starting point for any discussion. But the purpose today is to get you to think about these things. And I think we should thank you again for coming to this liberal place, for being so eloquent, for being so graceful, and for making us think, because that's what we have to do. Think hard, because it is going to happen probably to 100 women in this class. And thank you very, very much.